Purdue University. So he's Robert Susan Gadomski Chair in Economics. His teaching and research interests include behavioral and experimental economics, fields of industrial organization, environmental and public economic. He's director of Purdue University Vernon Smith Experimental Economics Laboratory. And he served as the president of the Economic Science Association. He holds a BA from IU, so he's one of us, and a PhD from University of California. So it's such a pleasure, Tim, to have you here. Today, he will be talking about the entrepreneur's choice of mechanisms, refund bonuses, and crowdfunding public goods. So rules of engagement, you'll be talking around 15 to 20 minutes. I will be keeping the queue. Also, for the people that are following online, the same thing. I will try to also give you time to ask questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for coming today as well. This is a little bit of an odd format for my presenting experience, but I'm looking forward to it. Should be interesting. What I'll do is try to give an overview and have lots of details stuck at the end. If there are questions, I'll go into those. But I'm hoping that this topic, which is a very much an ongoing research project I'm presenting today, is going to be appropriate for an interdisciplinary audience. I think that we're all familiar with this way of funding public goods and also raising capital through crowdfunding sites. So I think we can all identify that many of you have contributed to Kickstarter, or Indiegogo, or even GoFundMe pages as well. This is the slide that says, this is a lot of money, not millions but billions of dollars, and there's old data on overall amounts. Kickstarter itself, I just pulled up a couple of weeks ago, has raised over $7 billion in its existence. So there's a lot of economic activity going on here, and we're kind of studying this from a mechanism design point of view here, because when you raise funds in a way like this, you're setting some rules that are affecting the incentives for contributors. Okay, and in particular, a common feature is threshold implementation. Sometimes in the crowdfunding business, this is called the all or nothing model, okay, where only if you hit a threshold are the pledges actually extracted from the contributors. Otherwise, if you fall short, then they actually don't charge your credit card. Nobody actually makes the contributions. And in that category, the points I'm trying to make on this slide here is that there are we're familiar with contributing to creative projects on Kickstarter, like art projects, music projects, things like that. You can think of those as kind of public goods projects that people all value when the intellectual property is produced. But actually, the majority of this type of threshold implementation is actually for in finance, without intermediaries. So it's a direct investor to entrepreneur mediation mechanism, and that's kind of what our focus is for this experiment that I'll tell you about. So this idea of the threshold or the provision point mechanism goes back quite a while. Ben Franklin actually gets credit for this, even though I'm sure around before him. But this is 1751. Franklin realizes that we need a hospital in Philadelphia and wants to raise money for it. The Assembly didn't want to contribute any, and he said, if I can raise, the numbers are funny, 2,000 British pounds, then from raising money through pledges, then the Assembly would match it with another 2,000 pounds. And it was successful. The hospital was built, the first hospital in Philadelphia. When I think about the mechanism in that situation, suppose it's a public good that is worth, need this hospital, or there's enough value for creating this artwork that the public values it sufficiently. There is an equilibrium where we meet that threshold. And if even though an individual may not value it enough themselves to pay for the whole hospital or pay for the entire piece of artwork, if others are contributing, it's a best response to contribute and meet the threshold. But there's also equilibria where nobody contributes anything. That's an equilibrium too. As long as one person doesn't value the hospital, more than its cost, you have inefficient equilibria and efficient equilibria. The refinement that I'm going to be talking about, this refund bonus idea, gets rid of the inefficient equilibrium. Okay, it eliminates those incentives and can result only if the public good is valued enough. The only equilibrium is for it to be provided. So here's the basic idea, and it's very simple. Standard provision point mechanism. We try to meet some target, capital G here. We're going to solicit contributions from individuals, the crowd. If they sum up to that threshold, we're done. Okay, we're funded. As I just said, you can have equilibria there where little g is all zero, and that's an equilibrium. Not an equilibrium if you have this extension where if the threshold is not met, our new twist is that everybody gets their money, their pledged money back, or their credit card was never actually charged, but they get a little bonus, maybe 10% of what they intended to pledge. This would be R equals 0.1 if we did a 10% bonus. So you can see right away that that gets rid of the outcome where nobody contributes anything, because if I think that nobody's contributing, I'll go ahead and put a pledge in anyway, especially if I value it. And then if it doesn't get funded, I at least get some money back. Right? So it's no longer an equilibrium for no one to contribute. So we studied this. Well, here's a bunch of other people looking at non-coercive fundraising mechanisms. Skip over that for this short introductory talk. We studied that basic mechanism in a series of papers. So this is part of that research agenda. And I said a couple slides ago that the majority of actually this threshold implementation in crowdfunding is for crowd investing, where you've got entrepreneurs trying to raise capital. Our first studies were in the category of really just pure public goods provision, where collectively this, whatever we're trying to raise funds for, is valued by the group, but nobody values it enough to pay for it all themselves. So just looking at that coordination problem that can arise. And we looked at various aspects of that refund bonus mechanism to see how it operates in practice, where in practice means in a lab controlled setting where we can vary aspects of it to try to refine some properties. So I'll show you a glimpse of that and then talk about the main study, which is what I intend to focus on. So we're gonna see whether, we originally came up with this idea as a mechanism and design problem to eliminate inefficient equilibria, as I've just described. But it turns out that it could also serve as a signaling function to transmit information, private information from the entrepreneur to investors, to more effectively fund the good projects that provide greater social value and not the bad ones. Okay, so it works as a screening device as well. All right, so let me give in this setting, I'm going to be describing a lab environment. And by the way, and this is something I hope we get to talk about later during the hour, it's perfect for field experiments as well, but I'll tell you some stories of difficulties I've had trying to implement this with field experiments. So we're in the lab, we can kind of create conditions that are like a crowdfunding situation. So for example, one feature of Kickstarter is you can go on there right now, especially if you have a laptop with you, and see what you want to fund. Usually they're open for 30 days. You can see how much they've raised. You can make a contribution and immediately see how the amount raised has gone up by your contribution. You can make more contributions. So we implement that in the lab. So asynchronous, endogenously timed contributions with updating on the total amount. Our crowd in our experiments is a crowd of 10, which is not obviously hundreds, but actually most Kickstarter campaigns are less than 100 contributors. So it's not a crazy number. And we explored different types of bonus rates. One of the things we looked at in one of our papers is trying to use refund bonuses to get things going. So Kickstarter says, within, I said normally they're a month open. Kickstarter says within the first few days they can tell whether this is going to take off or not, because if it doesn't get going early on, it never really takes off. So can we use this refund bonus to get good projects started? So in our lab setting, all the projects are good. We're not talking about the screening aspect yet. And we did things like, you get this refund bonus only if you make your pledge in the early window, where we define clearly in the instructions what window that has to be. And also, can we simplify the types of way we implement the refund bonuses? So we do this in a continuous time experiment, and just one slide of results from that. Here's our baseline funding rate without any bells and whistles, just the standard threshold implementation like is done in practice. And here's a variety, and I won't go into details of what they are, but like this one, for example, gives you a refund bonus only if you contribute within the first half of the period. By the way, we don't do these in the lab for 30 days. We do them for 2 minutes. So that's the thing about these lab experiments. We can do it over and over again in these short windows and tweak it. But anyway, you can see it goes up by up to 50%. So this is effective at, doesn't get it to 100%. And the equilibrium actually is to meet 100% that threshold. There's still coordination problems that people would prefer others contribute to push it above the threshold. There's still a free rider problem that doesn't go away. Yeah.
Clarifying question. So the percentages here are percentages of the total required threshold amount.
No, these are the rates that the threshold is met.
Okay.
So it's a binary outcome. Does it met or not? And it's met 44% of the time. And actually Kickstarter, I think I had another slide, 37% of the time Kickstarter, reaches the threshold. Now that may be because it's not funding bad projects, which is certainly true. Kickstarter does limited vetting before they before projects are implemented or posted on the site. All right, so let me tell you about the crowd investing side, which is the focus of what I want to talk about in the last few minutes in this quick version. So can we use the refund bonus to screen out good projects from bad? So what I have in mind here, yeah, that's actually the majority of the crowdfunding environment. Presumably the fundraiser, the entrepreneur trying to raise money to develop their invention, has better information about the quality of that invention or not. So we think there's a sensible information asymmetry with investors and entrepreneurs. And one of the questions I always got when I presented some of those other papers is, where is these refund bonuses coming from? Right? Who's paying for these? Well, the entrepreneur can make the promise, and it can be a credible promise through the contract they have with the intermediary like Kickstarter or other fundraising systems. So here's the setting. We've got a bunch of investors. The entrepreneur starts this campaign, and the project can be bad or good. Our setting, this is the binary state space that we typically use in these kind of screening models. And we're going to assume that in the model, the entrepreneur knows the quality and likes to raise money either way. But they may, the investors are going to receive noisy signals about the quality, but they'll also find out whether the entrepreneur has decided to combine their fundraising campaign with a refund bonus plan. Okay? And that's going to signal something to the investors. And in equilibrium, it signals more likely to be a high quality, good quality project. And this is a simple refund bonus where it's just a fixed amount that you get from trying to contribute. There can be different types of equilibrium in these types of signaling agents. There can be a separating equilibrium where only say the good type of investor offers the refund bonus and the bad type doesn't. That type of equilibrium doesn't exist in the environment that we're setting up. A pooling doesn't either. A hybrid equilibrium is the key one that we're focusing on. And in a situation where without a refund bonus, we're going to look at a situation with market failure where we can't fund projects successfully. In those circumstances, there exists a hybrid equilibrium where the investors invest with probability, positive probability, and they respond to the refund bonus offer. And in particular, the good quality projects always offer a refund bonus, and the bad quality entrepreneurs play a mixed strategy where they, in standard equilibrium environments, creating the investors who are considering a project without a refund bonus as being equally likely to be good or bad. So that motivates the hypotheses for our experiment that refund bonuses, offering them increases the rate of fundraising success. And the key here is that the entrepreneurs, when they're considering whether to offer a refund bonus or not, those with the bad quality projects are less likely to offer refund bonuses. And that's the way the information is conveyed from the entrepreneur to the investors. there's money at stake, they're less likely to pay the refund bonus when they have a good quality project. So our treatments are endogenous bonus, where we have our human subjects that are going to make the decisions as entrepreneurs whether to offer bonuses or not after they learn their project quality. And the control treatment is actually, it still offers bonuses because the bonus itself is going to, make it more attractive to invest. But we want to separate the bonus offer from the information that it conveys about project quality. So we have this random bonus. And turns out that makes a big deal. So now I'm going to summarize the results in the remaining couple minutes here. Here's the big picture result. With the random bonus, the good quality projects, this is the rate of fundraising success, just about like we were talking earlier. The good projects in blue, bad projects in red. And there's a little difference here with the random bonus, and but a much larger difference in the endogenous bonus. So empirically, we find that the good quality projects are funded at significantly higher rates when we let the entrepreneurs choose whether to offer a bonus or not. Okay, obviously, these are very highly significant, and that's support for the first main hypothesis. Yes.
Sorry, never mind.
Okay. Random hand raised. Now, actually, this is amazing. This is the equilibrium rates, and this is the observed rates. They line up almost perfectly. It's kind of an accident, and actually, I'll show you in a second. So the overall funding rates of the projects line up perfectly with theory, but it's actually because of two offsetting factors that it happens to line up that way. In particular, here's the rate that the entrepreneurs offer the refund bonuses, and they don't do it often enough, okay? In the perfect Bayesian hybrid equilibrium here that we're using, the good projects, the entrepreneur should always offer a refund bonus, and they do so 70% of the time. And here they should offer it 5/9 of the time. And so they don't offer enough refund bonuses. So that's quantitatively how we differ from the equilibrium prediction. But they do certainly offer refund bonuses at a higher rate with the good projects. Investment rates are also not right, okay? This is a time series moving average, actually, to smooth it out a little bit across the 40 rounds. I've skipped over lots of details, but they do this 40 times. The equilibrium prediction for this blue highest line is indicated with the solid line. So that's 2/3, actually. It's the rate that investors, when they see a refund bonus, should invest. Okay? But the other three lines are the other circumstances. These are for the random bonus. This is when they don't see a bonus. They should all be 0. So the investors are investing too much. But the combination of those two things is what leads to this thing almost coming out perfect. But it's sort of an artifact. Anyway, let me just recap and then summarize. All these treatment differences are highly statistically significant, even using very conservative tests. Remarkably similar to the equilibrium rates, but it's, as I've just said, kind of a couple of different things. There's too much investment in the random bonus treatment. They should never invest when it's not providing information. And we show that that's clearly a dominated strategy, and yet people still do it. So last slide.
Over time?
No, they don't. Here's a slight drift down, but these should all get down to 0. And do you see a strong time trend? I don't. It is statistically significant for the random bonus case, but we'd have to run it for quite a while. It goes from 0.3 to 0.2 in 40 rounds.
So what are they learning when they? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost done. I'm on my last slide. The rules are the rules.
You see.
Would be like an econ talk.
All right, so what I've told you about, entrepreneurs frequently raise money this way in the billions of dollars. We're proposing a new way of potentially doing that to facilitate information transfer. And this increases, and equilibrium increases the likelihood the right projects are funded. And the data support qualitatively this signaling solution. Quantitatively, things are off a little bit, but that's what I've got. 20 minutes, that wasn't bad,
no,
right?
no.
Okay, so now I have Jimmy.
I thought Tim was way past 15, so I thought it was open.
I said 20, 15 to 20, then.
Just a couple of quick, if you could go back to the, so I'm an entrepreneur in the experiment. Is it just is my decision whether to give a bonus or not, or do I decide how much is the bonus?
It's just whether or not.
And what do I get?
So as an entrepreneur, you get a higher payment if your project is successfully funded. We gave the same payoff whether you were a good or a bad entrepreneur. You just get the money from the investors, and you don't get any more for being a good having a good.
And it's binary too. If it's funded, it's not. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the question I was going to ask is, so what, and this is not going down to zero, what are they? Why is it not going to zero? Maybe what are they learning? What's the feedback they're getting after a round where they've decided?
Yeah, so they're learning, and that's a very good question. They're learning what the quality of the project actually was. So they should start to recognize more the fact that good quality projects are having bonuses more frequently. There's something I glossed over. So the investors are in a situation where they've got some investment capital. They can put it in a risk-free and get a return there, or they can invest it in the projects. And there's actually a couple different projects going on. They can invest in both of them or neither or whatever. But when they invest in the project here, they can lose their investment or they can get a higher return if it's a good quality. So that's the conflict they're trying
And
to.
they're seeing that from round to round, whether they lost or not. Yeah.
And they are seeing that, they're when they're investing, they're earning the numbers are in the paper, but something like, actually instead of making them up. And now what have I done? Click on the earnings. Yeah, I had a nice little link here. There it is. So the investors, by not investing, they get a risk-free $2.50 each round. When they're investing, and here's the random bonus case, they're earning, $1.20 to $1.99. This is the average across all 40 rounds. So they're definitely earning less, but they're earning more when there's a refund bonus because they get the bonus when the investment fails. But anyway, so they're taking on more risk and getting lower return by investing. And now again, they're doing it. Go back. They're doing it, 20% of the time, right? So it's not like they're doing it 100%. So they start at 30% of the time, they do it 20% of the time, but it's not getting to zero. But it's not like some environments where the feedback is very noisy. They sometimes get a positive payoff from investing, but it's in that sense it's noisy, but it's not super noisy, I guess.
So I have Kari, Shannon, and then Ala in that order.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. Love your talk. Love this project. I have an observation and then I have 3 questions. So, choose your question, right? My first observation is that, as a musician, I'm pretty familiar with Kickstarter and all of its crowdfunding sources. I actually don't use them myself, but I'm familiar with the kinds of projects that are funded, and I don't think they're all public goods. My sense is that you've got some that are private goods or even club goods, probably not a commons, right? Because the way we define commons here at the workshop is, it's in terms of natural resources, most often, although, that's been expanded. So that's my first observation, So then that leads to my question, who defines crowdsourced goods as public goods? Because like a private good in a crowdfunding source might be a consumable like journal or a special food, or a club good could be, something like, anyways. And so then the second question is like, how are the qualities of a good or a bad project defined? Because it seems like the audience for that project would also determine whether or not something is good or bad. Like, you know, if I am not a fan of rap music, I'm not going to think a project, you know, that produces a CD of rap music is a good project, right? Whereas people who are audiences of that, who are the fans, they're going to think, you know, they'll have a finer tuned sense of guidelines that determine if it's good or bad. So that's my second question. How do the aesthetics of the what are the qualities of a good versus bad project? And the third one is then, well, I guess I'm going to forget that one. It doesn't make sense in your context. You're tying the bonus to the quality of the project, and the bonus matters.
Yeah, so certainly, I believe the case that there's lots of things that could be considered club goods or public goods or not public goods, or, you know, this investing stuff is just could be, you know, capital being raised. In some artistic endeavors, it could be a non-rival public good, right? So if you're funding a musical composition, and if it gets produced and the creator decides to put it in the public domain, you know, that's a non-rival public good, right? That everyone can appreciate.
They publish it on YouTube versus a CD that you have to buy.
That's right. And so a lot of these fundraising campaigns, you get something for your contribution too. So one that I contributed to, for example, a friend of mine was developing a pilot animated television episode to then sell to networks, which she didn't successfully sell, but she's the creator of Blue's Clues, by the way. So she has experience doing this. She's from South Bend, Indiana, actually, but she didn't know that. Anyway, but there, you know, I got something, you know, I got some like a digital short as they were developing the thing initially. So sometimes you get these gifts. Sometimes you get, you know, you just buy early access to the project. Strauss has a really good AER paper from a couple of years ago on the economics of crowdfunding and focusing on Kickstarter type things, not the crowd investing part, where, you know, he identifies as the two first order issues in crowdfunding are resolving demand uncertainty. So if you've got a new board game, say, that you want to develop, you don't know whether people want to buy that or not. If you go to a venture capitalist, they might say, you know, I don't know. And, you know, crowdfunding can actually reveal information about whether people think that's worth developing. The second issue he raises is the other first order issue is the moral hazard adverse selection problem that I've just been talking about, is, you know, resolving incomplete information and asymmetric information between the fundraiser and potential contributors. Now, as far as your example, some people might think what this good that's funds are being raised for is a bad. Use rap music as an example, but the people who are contributing to that, you know, they obviously feel differently about it. So, you know, in the non-crowd investing series of papers that I briefly mentioned, you know, we had a setting where, again, in the lab environment where it can induce values, but what people have for the public good, we set up an environment where the goods were valuable. You know, in aggregate, the sum across all of our 10-person crowd, you know, would find it valuable to fund it. So we just look at whether it gets funded or not. But certainly, you know, when there are bad quality projects being posted on Kickstarter, they hopefully are not getting funding successfully.
Good. Shannon, you're next.
Jet, so to clarify, the mechanism is the actual entrepreneur will pay back the investors?
Yes, so but plus the bonus. So the way the mechanisms always work, if the threshold's not, you know, for threshold implementation anyway, if the threshold's not met, then nobody actually ends up paying anything. But the twist is that there's some small amount that the entrepreneur has to pay the potential investors.
If the threshold is not met.
Only if the threshold is not met.
Then I guess totally opposite of that. I noticed that you have the randomized and then you have the mechanism on the good projects. Have you considered doing the mechanism just on the bad projects? I think if you did that, it would be an easier way to kind of indicate if it's actually providing a signal versus
Yeah, that might make the environment too simple though, in the sense that then then the mechanism, the bonus will be a perfect indicator of the project quality. And we're looking at a situation where, in this hybrid equilibrium anyway, sometimes bonuses are offered for good and bad projects, but there's a higher rate for the good projects.
I understand. Okay,
Ala?
My question was about the rates of the rate of getting the bonus random and the endogenous one, were they similar? So.
Yeah, they were. I mean, we actually picked, we picked a 50-50 randomization before we ran the experiment. What we may end up doing to make referees happy is we could target a overall rate that matches the endogenous bonus treatment, but they're not too different to begin with.
Endogenous one ended up in the same.
Yeah. And that's actually, that's sort of luck, because in equilibrium, oops, here we go. The good projects are always supposed to offer the refund bonus, and the bad projects, more than half the time. So that would have meant we would have, in the endogenous bonus, we would have had a lot more bonuses being offered than in the random bonus treatment. But because everything is lower offer rate for the bonuses, that's why we get close to, the average of these is about 50%. So it worked out. Serendipitous experimental design.
Vova?
So let's say I want to write a paper which will, get the opposite result of yours, right? So I'm buying everything you are saying, but I would say, look, you do omit this part where entrepreneurs should provide some kind of funding to refund the bonuses, right? So you have the selection process in the sense that only entrepreneurs who are able to collect this initial amount to guarantee payment of bonuses will be then selected, because your sorting mechanism kind of kills everybody who cannot do that, right? So like over time, people learn, don't go where a bonus is not offered, right? And so then it happened. The thing is that you have this heterogeneity and ability of entrepreneurs to collect this initial amount. Plus, this will also discriminate against larger projects, right? Because to fund something which is $1 million versus $100 million, I think
Putting more bonuses out there.
I need that thing, right? So that would be kind of my point, like to go into this pre-stage of this game. So within this game, I think it all looks great, but then you mentioned that, okay, maybe entrepreneurs will fund that, but then you don't include it as part of your model. And then you eliminate this selection process in the beginning. So that's.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And suggests some extensions of the model and potentially of the experiment. I think one way to potentially address the target fundraising that's required might be so the way we set up our experiment, you invest or not, you have 1 unit of capital. But you could scale that if you're trying to raise $50,000 or $1 million, you could, I need $50,000 units of capital versus, $20,000 units of capital, and just scale it that way. But we're envisioning an environment where the level of the bonus is not that large, and we've worked it out numerically for what the equilibrium looks like for the size of bonus that we chose. But we don't see it being, more than say 10% of what you're trying to raise potentially. But on the other hand, that's going to dilute the signaling value of putting that risk up front.
No, so I think it's like great idea in the sense that you're minimizing my time as an investor to read on each project and rank them in my head and then select it like that. I just see which ones offer refund, and maybe you can do even a refund rate endogenous, right? So where refund rate is higher and all that. So, and that kind of ranks it for me in 5 minutes. I can decide where to invest, right? So I can see this information and our cost will be decreased by this mechanism. And I think that's a great idea, right? So I'm just putting this, as economists, of course, we are suspicious, we are trying to.
Yeah, and it may not work for very large projects, for example. And this might be more applicable to something that's modest. Yeah.
Yes, you're next.
Yeah, I had some very similar kinds of concerns, but much more clearly articulated, so thank you. I guess I had one clarifying question and then another question about what is sort of where you're going next with this. So first is, I can't recall, can investors see who else is invested in real time, or are they just, in this case, it's just like Kickstarter, right? They can see the amount going up even by others or just by themselves?
So neither. I presented this in a confusing way because I told you about the continuous time environment, which is what our other papers, two of our three other earlier papers did that. We've gone back to a simpler setting here where the investors make simultaneous decisions. So they don't see any updates on what others have done. They're making their investment decision.
Okay, so there's no social signal.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the first question, just a clarifying one. You mentioned that the signal is not super noisy, and I was curious from the entrepreneur, right? In terms of when they provide a bonus, right? Essentially, there's a semi-separating or hybrid equilibrium whereby all of the, all of the good ones provide a bonus and some of the bad ones do, right?
And it's not quite there. I mean, the good ones are providing it more than twice the rate of the bad ones, but yeah.
It strikes me that in a real world scenario, depending on the nature of the good, right, there's quite a bit of uncertainty about whether the project is a good one or not, even from the entrepreneur side. And so I'd be really curious, right? I would expect larger amounts of money to go somewhat with egotistical ideas about the project and what is likely to be a very good project. But that aside, right, I'd be curious if there's any plan or interest in extending it to essentially make that signal noisier from the perspective of the entrepreneur who may or may not know whether this invention is actually going to take off, for example.
No, I think that's interesting. And I do have interest in doing that because as I just said a minute ago, another first order problem is demand uncertainty. The entrepreneur doesn't know whether this board game is one that they can make a lot of money off of, and they can find out partly by launching a crowdfunding campaign to try to.
But even beyond, but more than demand goes into making the invention successful, I would imagine,
Sure.
right? So
Right.
supply chain, whatever it is, the nature of the good that they're providing. And so even if they reveal the demand uncertainty through this mechanism, there may still be uncertainty about the success of the project. So I sort of
So
curious about that.
we've done the most simple alternative where the entrepreneur knows with certainty their project's quality, but I think it would be interesting to examine what happens.
Do you have any expectations about what, like, let's say they know with like 70%, like there's some probability.
Yeah, I think if we're in the neighborhood of the parameter set that we're looking at now, like we just had a little uncertainty, it won't change things dramatically. But how much uncertainty do you introduce? At what point, to reach a point where this hybrid equilibrium doesn't exist anymore? It's too risky to be an entrepreneur. With enough uncertainty, I'm sure that's the case. So there's some switching point.
You?
Well, thank you so much. Very interesting. It goes around capital campaigns, non-profit, venture capital, all of that is very applicable. I have one first clarification question. When the investor says he's going to invest, is a pledge or actually gives the money to the entrepreneur?
It is, you should interpret it as a pledge because the money is never collected until the threshold is met.
Okay. And that going to the real world implementation, for instance, what are your thoughts about the potential risk for the entrepreneur saying, for instance, one person gives a pledge, actually doesn't use money, but for him could be better to ensure that the project never arrives to the threshold because I win in money for doing nothing. What is?
Yeah, so in some of our earlier studies where we weren't looking at the investing problem, but just the crowdfunding problem, we played around with, we created treatments where the refund bonuses were so valuable that the investors were better off by missing the threshold. And there, the system should not work for funding projects at a higher rate, and that's exactly what we found. So you would never do this in practice, make the refund bonuses so large they don't work and they prevent funding of good projects. But in that sense, the theoretical properties of the refund bonus, we were reassured that it works the way it's supposed to work because, you know, it improves things when they're small and should improve funding public goods. And it, you know, makes things worse when they're too large. In practice, I found this out actually when we were talking with Kickstarter about a potential field experiment, which didn't end up going anywhere. But I was under the impression that once you made the pledge, you were bound to that pledge. Because Kickstarter doesn't publicize the fact that if the project is funded, it hits the threshold, but it's enough above the threshold that you can withdraw your contribution and it doesn't affect whether it's funded or not. You can do that. They sort of let you do that on a case-by-case basis. But anyway, so it's not a true binding commitment.
Yeah, and that's what I was, because also pledge are legally binded supposedly, but for relations with your founding partners, they're not good too.
It was interesting talking to the, you know, higher ups at Kickstarter. They, you know, I think they're a profit maximizing business providing this intermediary service, and they do take a percentage of the money that's raised, but at least they were talking the talk of being, you know, socially minded. You know, we're doing this for the community, not to make money. I don't know, they still made a lot of money, so I don't know if that's just lip service or what, but interesting talking to them.
Yeah, I will ask a question, but then the queue is open. So if more people have questions, please. So I was thinking the following. So it's so you are finding much bigger effects for the signaling part than for the bonus itself, you know. So but that may depend on the specific parameters of what you are setting up. So essentially, if you start reducing the distance between a good and a bad project, the value of the signaling at some point will shrink to almost nothing. You know? So again, I was thinking it's like, do you have, so if you go with this result and then you go to, let's say, observational data, okay, can you learn something about this is essentially driven by signaling, or this is mainly a bonus effect? Because from reality, we don't know exactly which component should be more important. You know? So it's again, so it's I'm thinking about the kind of the implications for an entrepreneur. It's like, well, I should be seriously using this as a signal, you know. But well, that depends on in the area in which I am putting a project, how much uncertainty and variation there is between like good and bad projects. Or I know if these platforms, they do some previous screening, it might be the case that they are implicitly reducing the range of uncertainty on signaling. So you do not get such a big effect for signaling. Okay, so something like that.
I mean, certainly our results are based on the parameters we chose to implement the experiment. We are looking in an environment where we deliberately have a setting where without refund bonuses, there will be market failure, so that we won't be able to successfully fund any projects. And you know, this is a situation where the level of bonuses that we chose for our parameters are one such that we get this hybrid equilibrium. And we didn't try to calibrate that with actual, you know, differences between good and bad projects, because there's obviously a continuum, right? So, you know, as soon as you see the assumption, oh, Cason's done a bad project or a good project is just a binary outcome, that's already making a huge simplification that it's very common in these kinds of models in economics, but yeah, it may be a stretch. This, you can think of this maybe as a proof of concept, that this idea of using this extra information that the entrepreneur can convey through this type of offer may lead to an increase in the rate of good projects being funded relative to bad. It is true that there's some screening already that's done. My understanding is that for big platforms like Kickstarter, that's raised billions of dollars, they do a pretty minimal amount of screening initially. That is before they'll post a project. Like, is it a real project? They do a few things like that. If it's a product that's going to be produced, they want a prototype that's, available before you do funding, for example. However, they don't actually check that the prototype is a working prototype until the project is actually funded. And they have famously, with some big projects that raised over $1 million, they then, after the fundraising was successful, they then checked and found that it was a BS prototype. It actually didn't work, and they canceled the whole project. So they have power before they can transfer the funds. That's when they do their more due diligence for the projects they're trying to raise money for. So I think the screening is, at least at the fundraising stage, is not as stringent as like.
So I have a second question, it's more like the crazy type of question. Okay. So what if we are talking about this collective action? So essentially the public good is a collective. So is this telling you something about you're raising money, for example, for among interest groups to finance something, a policy reform or something? Should we revise something about theory of collective actions across these lines, or is crazy stretch that we are suggesting here?
Yeah, I mean, it may be a crazy stretch. I will say that, and I talked about, and maybe I can elaborate a little more on attempts at doing some field experiments with this. In one case, we were speaking with folks at a philanthropy conference, and they raised money like this, but this threshold implementation is much more common in for-profit campaigns and for crowd investing. Nonprofits typically use a raise what you can model, where this is like GoFundMe, right? When my sister, who's a kindergarten teacher at Indianapolis Public Schools, puts in a GoFundMe to buy whatever for her kindergartners, if she doesn't hit her target of whatever it is, $500, only raises 400, she gets the 400, right? To do a lower level of the public good, whatever you want to call it. And that was when we tried to explain to these nonprofits, here, this is another way of raising funds that can get rid of these inefficient equilibria where nobody's contributing. And they're like, they look at us funny, like, we don't do it that way. We put out these calls with these goals, and if we don't reach our goal, we keep the money anyway, right? So that kind of collective action problem, this probably doesn't apply to as much. This is more like the for-profit sort of environment. On the other hand, some of these things that are kind of could be considered a collective action problem, they do sometimes use these thresholds. So another attempt at a field experiment that didn't pan out was, there's actually, you can go to this URL, experiment.com. What a great URL. Somebody actually has that. And if you go there, you'll find it's a crowdfunding site for small experiments. Think of it as like a PhD student who wants to raise $4,500 to do something. They're small. They're around $5,000, but they probably mostly raise money from their grandmother and others like that. There's small research projects that are clearly just basic research in most cases. And we actually got them very interested in running an experiment because they use this threshold implementation. Unfortunately, the only thing that stopped us there is they were going to let us, take over for a time period and randomize into refund bonuses or not. But they're small. The number of projects actually, so everybody should use experiment.com, get them big enough so we can do it. So I got their data and did a power analysis, and we would have had to take over their site for about 6 months. And that's when they were like, we want to help out, but we're not going to change our complete business for your experiment. Kickstarter would have been great because they're very big, and we could have taken over their site for a couple of days and got the data we need. But anyway, that is a collective action thing.
They wanted Kickstarter. Sorry, just a follow up. So Kickstarter, are they interested in?
They were interested, and this is, again, I usually do lab experiments because it's frustrating to do field experiments. The people who were our contacts and we're moving forward with them left the company. It's like, and you got to start over and try to hook somebody else in. And we basically just said, let's just do another lab experiment and try these other things. So I'm still waiting for the partner who, and I'm not actively looking for them right now, but this is, something that is very much, aligned with the field experiment approach. I just should do that, but I should do this with people who are more experienced in attracting field experiment partners. And the issue is trying to, the problem we're trying to study, that has to be a solution to a problem they're trying to solve. And I haven't quite found the right partner to do that.
I have Kari and Shes. I don't know who
Yeah.
wants to go first.
I had a follow-up question to my question from the beginning of our hour. So how are you defining bad projects and good projects within the context of the experiment?
Yeah, in this setting, the bad projects, when you put your investment capital in the bad project, you lose it. So you actually don't get a positive return. So think of it as an investor, where you can invest in something that's going to go up in value or go down in value. And that's basically all it is.
So it's not a measure of aesthetic value or moral value. It's not like.
No, this is an induced value. So, we're going to pay people in cash that depends on the outcomes of their investment decisions.
I was thinking about your sort of how to sell it into a lab in field thing, because it seems from earlier on you were talking about, well, this mechanism matters, especially at the beginning of the trajectory, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're sort of testing. But it seems to me that if it's really about signaling, after that first threshold, it is about social signaling, right? And so you as a potential funder are looking around saying, they must know something I don't know.
Yep.
Right. And this is then a standing ovation problem, actually.
Yep.
Right. And so I would be curious, what is the threshold of bonuses you actually have to give out, right, for the social signaling to take off? Right, and then you have, I don't know, it's obviously not part of this project, but if the goal is to understand like the difference between the signal coming from the bonus and signal and the social signal and when and how those might interact. Is there an experiment you could design that allows both of those? And
Yeah, so there have been experiments looking at exactly the problem you're describing, where the contributors to some, it could be a pure public good or something else like a club good, that there's information asymmetry across contributors, and you can signal your knowledge that it's a good project to fund by loudly and early on making contributions. And that certainly happens in practice as well. And there's lots of models looking at this, lots of experiments that have looked at this as well. Nothing's combined what we're doing with.
well, that's my question, is the bonus a credible signal to the potential investors of the quality of the project, or just that somebody else is getting paid in case they lose and I'm not? Right, and that's not a sufficient indicator for me to invest.
Yeah, I mean, if we did something like we did in some of our earlier studies where we only gave bonuses for early contributions, things like that, then that kind of dilutes the signaling value. But we didn't do that in the context where the different investors or contributors had different information. I could see how that would muck up the value of the information conveyed by previous contributions by others. But this is, fundraising. I'm no expert in fundraising, but they're, you launch big capital campaigns for a university with lots of money already raised, right? That's how they're announced, with this money, because that's presumably providing information that others should value the campaign.
Jimmy and then Diego.
Go ahead. I guess Tim later. That's okay.
You were talking, this is obviously in the lab right now. Which are the elements that you consider challenges to put that into the real field and to starting to see how these are the ones that you are already facing and what you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it requires changing the mechanism and getting a partner who's got an existing. I could create a new fund. I could do a new crowdfunding site, Tim's Crowdfunding, and implement my own experiments, but it's attracting, some investors to even consider that. It's hard. So looking at an existing platform, you have to get behind the scenes and change the rules. And now we can put the money up for it. In fact, that's what we were going to do with the experiment.com one, that even though it would have required us to take over their site for too long. That was why it fell apart. We had the money to do it. Eric and Wendy Schmidt Foundations provided funding for this. So there's foundation money, and we calculated that we had enough. If everything failed and we had to pay all the refund bonuses, we could do that. So it's not the money, it's the partner that will allow us to play with their site.
Okay, real quick. So it's fundraising week, 2 weeks, month on NPR.
Yeah.
So if you were going to take this to WFIU, would it mean something like, guys, we're going to propose funding a show that we're not going to fund otherwise. Right? It's not going to be there. If you guys give enough money, then we'll put this show up. It may turn out to be good. It may turn out to be bad. And then even if we don't get enough money, we're going to still give those who contributed, we're going to give them their money back. We're not going to take it, but we'll give you coffee cups and other things. Does that come pretty close?
Yeah. That would be like,
So it doesn't really need to be a percentage of the contribution, even though you
No.
can.
no, and back
You
then,
get 2 coffee cups.
so Robertus is one of my co-authors on this. He has a Journal of Public Economics paper that worked out a lot of the theoretical detail for the simplification where you get a percentage of your pledge back, but that's not necessary at all. And in fact, our first experiment did that, but our later ones, because it's simpler to be a coffee cup or some fixed amount. And these refund bonuses is just an amount, $1.50 or something like that you got back. So it can be a fixed amount.
I've always wondered on fundraising for NPR and things, somebody will call in and say, we'll match your funding for this much money, et cetera. I always wondered if they don't get it, does it still get matched?
I'm very skeptical. Of course, they're gonna get that money anyway. Yeah, and there's matching schemes, there's lotteries that, that involved in fundraising, and there's lots of these other mechanisms to try to improve the incentives for contributors. This is just another one of those that has nice theoretical properties. And apparently, some in this laboratory test bed anyway, which is where we're at now, seems to work. Screening out imperfectly, but doesn't work as well as it should, but it works.
We have time for 1, maybe 2 quick questions, and then you can answer those questions and then final wrap up. Yeah, can you go and then move on?
Do you have any policy recommendation for the non-state actors or state actors to make a mechanism for boost up all of this funding?
Yeah, I mean, it just would be that, here's a proof of concept that this is an improved version of threshold implementation that has, eliminates some undesirable equilibrium outcomes. And there's some empirical evidence. It doesn't exist, right? This is one role of experiments, to try to provide some empirical evidence for, a made up mechanism that some theorists came up with. And it seems to work, not perfectly, but then this suggests that it has potential to be used in practice. This is the policy implication. So we need to move in that direction, like with field experiments, as I've been saying.
Yeah, so despite my earlier skepticism, right? So I think this is an idea which can be monetized. I think that Kickstarter might be kind of skeptical because they're so large, and for them to change the whole thing, and there is maybe some risks they don't see or you don't see, right? And that will change. It will worsen, but like I checked online, there are many companies which are much smaller than Kickstarter. And so maybe they will jump on opportunity, and maybe you shouldn't sell them to them like, oh, look, why don't we use your website and we see what's happening and maybe you'll get some profit. Maybe you should be like, we can charge you for giving you this unique opportunity to improve your business, right? And then
Yeah, if we charge them, then they'll want
I
to.
don't know if legally you can do that, right? But yeah.
Well, my university would want me to patent this first before doing anything.
Oh, 30 seconds for to wrap up.
Yeah, was there a wrap up part? No, I kind of already did my wrap up, the recap. Thank you very much, everyone, for your comments and suggestions and a nice, fun dialogue about this.
There is, I think,